Batterton, Legal & General. I am fund manager responsible for build to rent, but at Legal & General we're also doing build to sell. We've established a modular business to build homes in a factory. Last week we announced the launch of an affordable housing provider, and in addition to all that there's also a part of the business called L&G Surveying Services that effectively brokers about a third of all the mortgages in the UK. So we're sort of entwined into lots of different areas of the housing market.
Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul Maltby, Chief Digital Officer at the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. So in addition to just running the internal systems in the department, trying to help local government improve its digital capability, I've got a team just starting to help improve the access to data to support innovation across the sector, including on the planning side as well as the housing and selling side.
Thank you.
Morning, Killian. Hurley. I'm Chief Executive of Mount Anvil. We're a central London-focused residential developer, and we've been making mistakes in the London market and learning since 1991.
I'm Melanie Leech, Chief Executive of the British Property Federation, which is the trade association for the UK property industry. Our interest in residential is primarily around build to rent. My role is primarily focused on policy, so trying to influence the policy and the regulatory framework so that our industry can have long-term health and sustainability, which I think is where I'm really interested in the role that innovation and digital transformation can play, because as Susan's already said, I think we're quite late to this party, but it's going to be critical to the future health and sustainability of our industry.
Thank you. So let's go straight in with recent house building figures, which in the first 3 months of the year showed a substantial fall because of the weather. We've had all the housing ministers, I think 17 in the last 20 years, who just can't understand how we build in the same way as we built in Victorian times, which is a very good question. So should we kick off in what we're doing to innovate, whether off-site construction is the way forward? And Dan, I don't know if you want to start on that. Obviously, L&G have just acquired a wonderful new factory.
Yeah, we're what, 100,000 homes a year short. I looked to the public sector to tell me that, but about 100,000 homes short. There is limited incentive, I would suggest, in planning policy and building regulations and in investors' shareholdings to make the existing traditional house builders build in a different way. Their business models are very successful. The chief execs do very well. I don't know.
We're not a house builder.
But it's a very successful business, and they build about 150,000 homes a year. But we need 250,000 homes a year. So how are we going to build those new homes? I like to think of it as a 100,000 home problem, not a 250,000 home problem, and think that different business models can fill that 100,000 home gap. So build to rent is one of those. I think we could be a third of the solution. I think the public sector could quite easily be a third of the solution, 30,000 homes a year. And I think retirement living is another area we should be looking at, that could be a third of the solution. It's not just the construction, and we can talk about that, but we're just not efficiently using the land that we have. I'd like to see some innovation into how do we better use the land that we've got and the buildings that we've got. We've got enough bedrooms to house everybody in this country. It's just a lot of them are empty and are box rooms and are just not efficiently used. So I'd like to think about how we can better use what we already have as well as build more. In terms of innovation on construction, yes, L&G are investing into a big, 500,000 square foot factory just outside Leeds to build thousands of homes a year using precision engineering and deliver them to site so that people can be living in them very, very quickly. And the technology isn't rocket science there. It's simply putting some long-term money into an area that needs some investment. But equally, it's finding the demand for that product. That a lot of that product is in those 3 new sectors that are required to support the growth of house building. It's those parts of the market that want speed of delivery, want the homes instantly, don't want to drip feed homes into the market to maximise price and control sales rates. It's about speed of delivery. So the innovation that's going on there is really exciting, but it's also the business models we don't know about yet. It's the law of unintended consequences is what I find exciting about modular construction. The fact that you could order your house on a Friday and move into it on a Monday, how does that change the business model for the entire construction industry? I have no idea. I'd like to jump forward 10 years and have a look and then maybe work back through it. But those innovations, we just don't know what the impact will be, and it's going to be exciting to see how it follows through.
I was going to say, Dan, probably the scariest thing, if we jump back 10 years and see how much has changed, it's probably bugger all, which is the real scary thing. I was really taken with James's comment earlier on about this mentality change. I think, again, Dan, as you said, people in the residential industry in the last 10 years, we've had one hell of a party. Well, certainly London has been a fantastic place to work in. So necessity is the mother of all invention. Perhaps now that we're into a more challenging market, we'll become more open to looking at different ways of doing things. And I brought my bag of swag here. So Dan, how's your hands? Okay, that's a plastic 3D manufactured brick. There's none of us in London using them. Why not? Because we're not feckin' bright enough to look at the opportunities that are available out there, and we're not sufficiently challenged. So I'm hoping Paul is going to give us a couple of insights into how we can do better on all of this. But yeah.
Over to you, Paul.
It's quite a challenge, isn't it? I mean, start off on the basics. We know that there's a really big challenge out there. I think you can safely say that this is the government's biggest domestic policy priority. And you've got a lot of activity going on. You've got the reforms to planning. You've got the creation of Homes England with a more activist role in making the land and the infrastructure come together. You've got £15 billion of funding over 5 years, and including within that 1.5 billion on the new build fund. So really directed towards the SME community. My role personally within the organisation is really focused on how do you bring in more of that data and digital disruption into this sector. When you look at whether it's the local authorities making plans, if it's developers trying to find plots for building, when you're looking for going through the planning application process, whether it's the construction process, the home buying and selling parts of this, very often you find that a critical part of this is knowledge, acquiring knowledge about a site, verifying that a thing is true and exists, and an awful lot of that information exists somewhere on somebody's machine in the public sector, if you're lucky, otherwise in a big leather-bound volume hidden under the desk. And so what I'm really focused on is trying to get better access to particularly those the data across those organisations, and get that into the hands of you and colleagues around this sector that are trying to make a change. We see some of that already. I think it's really interesting to see some of the work that colleagues are doing. John Abbott from the Land Registry is talking later, and the work that they've been doing on the home buying and selling process with the sector. Also, with colleagues in places like Future Cities Catapult, working on the planning side and trying to bring that innovation into the planning sector. So I'm hungry for your essentially your user needs. What do you really want? Those of you that are working in the data part of this sector, how do you want to be able to find the data? How to improve it? And what can we do within our organisation to try and bring in a prompt for activity within that sector? But that's only, of course, one small part of the whole reform process.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I think just the fact that your role exists is encouraging in terms of
and it's a new role, it's a new move really for that department.
Which is great. And Melanie, do you want to talk a bit about Future Cities Catapult since
Yes,
Paul's
thank you. So, I mean, firstly, just to say, I mean, I really agree with Dan. This is not just about building new homes. This is actually about renovating, repurposing, modernising, innovating around our existing stock, because we're not going to just keep on building and building and building. We have to make better use of the buildings that already exist. One of the other things I've been really struck by, I will get to the Future Cities Catalog, I promise, so far this morning is this issue of culture. And I think it's one of the real big challenges is how to get the two cultures, if you think of property and tech as two different cultures, how you get them sufficiently together to share the same challenge, because we were in a meeting yesterday afternoon, Susan and I with others, talking about this culture issue. And if you think of the property industry, and I represent commercial property companies as well as house builders, you're taking multi-million pound decisions for a up to 10-year project with a 30-year lifespan. You're going to be risk averse. That kind of goes with the territory. And you're going to have really big problems.
Melanie, but is a risk averse, or are we just dinosaurs?
I think there's a bit of both. I think it's understandable to be risk averse, and I think part of the challenge to the tech community is to say, make me believe that I'm taking a bold decision and not an unwarranted risk. But I think also, having come from outside the industry 3 years ago, I think there is a bit of brontosaurus in there too.
To come back a bit to, is it really a crisis? A crisis is something that's short-term and immediate, but this is something that is going to be generational. It's much bigger than a crisis. This is about generational inequality. This is about us as a country having got comfortable with house price inflation is a good thing. House price inflation ties up huge amounts of our wealth as a nation into a single asset and doesn't allow us to go and use that money to spend on resources and other assets. We're not out buying products and supporting our manufacturing industry because we're out there trying to save up money for deposits for homes. So the knock-on impact, if we can free up the housing market, if we can get house price growth to be similar to inflation rather than significantly beyond, the wider economic impact to UK PLC is material.
So I think when we think about how we're going to get out of the bind that we're in at the moment, there's a huge amount of activity going on. If you're thinking about trying to increase the numbers of houses, trying to reform the system. But I think the thing that's really important to take here is that we're not going to get that shift out of this crisis without doing things in a different way. The people that are going to make that happen are among us today. It may not be, right here, right now. It's still relatively small, and I think the presentation earlier pulls some of that out. But the opportunity here is enormous. The opportunity for doing things in a more productive way, of saving money. I mean, just thinking about the home buying and selling process, it's conveyancing, 70 days or something like that on average? Well, the opportunity, right? The opportunity to bring that down with, if the information was accessible and the funding was there and the entrepreneurial skills were there and the knowledge of the market is there, well, actually many of those things were in place. And say from my side, it's making sure that the government, in its sort of in its own way, is there supporting that shift in the sector from the digital and the data side.
Yes, and the government's got to incentivise developers and house builders to build more and build more quickly, and to, we haven't touched on planning. I don't know if there's time to touch on planning, but, if one could simplify, the system, you're doing, what you can to make information available, and one doesn't then want to be stuck in planning for months and years.
Indeed. Planning is obviously there's a lot going on in planning, and some of it is sort of retail and citizen focused, some of it industry focused. But Pete and I and the team, we were talking with a local authority that we're working on to try and improve the planning application process. They're saying they've got 50% attrition rate for applications for very, very simple things like, extensions to garages and things like that. Well, actually, if you've got that, this is entirely codified. There's no political judgment. There's no other factors going on there. And so we've got a long way to go, I think, in the public sector, both on local authorities and in central government, to make sure that our processes are appropriately citizen-focused, appropriately modular technology that can support when you interact with us. We've got to be providing you with elegant services that work and don't just bind things up in years of process for no particular reason.
I think, Paul, I mean, you know, with the available technology now, there's just no excuse for lack of transparency. And every time in every industry where there's a lack of transparency, bad things happen. And the more transparent we can make that planning system, I think we'll have a far better system.
I think there's not an irony, there's a need to link up here, because we, as the people who are putting in planning applications, are quite happy to pay more. For us, for me, putting in a planning application on a build-to-rent scheme, I know that on a £50 million scheme, roughly it costs me £50,000 per month that I don't have planning, because that's rent that we're not receiving. I would pay quite a lot more money to have certainty that I could get a planning application through in 6 weeks, whereas I buy land and assume it's going to take me 2 years. Because, so there's a huge amount of investors that would be willing to pay for the additional technology to go into public sector and planning. I'd love to see a lot of it automated. It's not about removing democracy from the process, but it's about removing politics from the process to a large extent.
And inefficiencies, Dan, just basic inefficiency. Form wasn't filled out correctly.
Yeah.
You post it back.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, you know, ridiculous.
That's it.
And I mean, are there other options that you know, we haven't talked about? I mean, self-build. Apparently, over 60% of homes in Germany are self-built, and I think it's under 10%. You know, here. I mean, there just seem to be quite a lot of you know, options that are out there that we just haven't looked at yet. And then we talk about density, and that we could, you know, we could do with more density. We've got all these redundant shops on high streets, which, you know, where one could build upwards. I mean, how do we get any of that happening?
Well, using big data to work out what's available, what land is not being used and what's being used inefficiently, understanding which homes are empty, and either incentivizing the owners of those homes to occupy them, sell them, release them, but start using those homes.
Yeah.
And the data exists, but in different areas and disparate areas, and it's great to see what the ministry is doing to bring that together, that information together to try and identify that.
And then I think, Dan, just using, you know, technology to show what this scheme will look like, and, you know, use the creative juices on the technology side to give lay people, you know, a feel. If we do this, this is how it's going to look. But then hold developers accountable. You said you were going to do this, you got to do it. And again, use data to go back and use technology just to go back and compare that. I think would be helpful as well.
Well, I mean, there's some interesting 3D realization technology that, you know, that some of the local authorities are using, and it just makes such a difference. You can actually see what a scheme's going to look like. So, you know, that's a step forward. But I think
we're using that now, Susan. I was on one of our schemes yesterday down in Vauxhall, where we're delivering about 600 homes and 100,000 square feet of commercial, and we're doing, I think, a 3D or a 4D BIM system. And that just identifies all the clashes, where buildings we need to get scaffolding overlapping. And for us then it's finding the right consultants and people to work with that will buy into that. Upfront investment, or goes, oh, it's very significant. This has cost us 100 grand. How much do we spend a month on prelims on this site? 125,000. So 1 month, back to your point, Dan, 1 month saving there, and this thing is paid for already. And that's the mindset thing that we just got to get better at, I think.
I mean, one of the criticisms in the Farmer Review, amongst many criticisms, was that the industry hadn't adopted BIM, and he talked about the lack of willingness to invest, collaborate, and the ability to see the bigger picture business case. So, you know, there is a lot.
He's right.
He's right. Do we think he's right?
Yeah, that. Well, I think it comes, you know, who's going to build these homes if we don't build them in a different way? Who is going to build what we need going forward for the next decade? It's not the current generation of builders, because they're all retiring in the next 10 years. So we have to find another way.
Some of us will keep going down.
But we have to find another more efficient way of building the homes. And some of it does come back to government policy. The new National Planning Policy Framework is great. I think there's some really good stuff in there. But I'd like to see more incentives for speed of delivery, more incentives for innovation. There are a lot of minimum hurdles that have to be hit in building regs and planning, and rather than any reward for exceeding and pushing the boundaries and taking risk. There is a limited incentive to take risk through the planning system. As an example, for the modular business and modular methods of construction, modern methods of construction, the planning system penalises speed of delivery. The planning system rewards those who have a scheme that takes a long time to build because it is considered less viable, and therefore you are required to provide less affordable housing. So if we can build things in 2 days, we have to provide much, much more affordable housing, which is great for the society, which is great. But it seems counterintuitive that you're being effectively penalised in your investment return for delivering something quickly. And that is because we've got a planning legal tax system that has been designed around home ownership rather than any other form of housing. And so it all is based around this conception that everybody just wants to own a home, rather than the Spotify approach of who buys CDs anymore. You just hire the music. Who would buy a house if you could just hire your house and it was of a good quality? So, sorry.
So, is there anything that we can do to move any of this forward before next year's future PropTech?
Can I just, given that I said my role is to influence policy, then it'd be wrong of me not to address a comment to Paul, which is an offer really, rather than the usual kind of, here's what government needs to do for us. I mean, it's absolutely not about that. And I echo Dan's comments around all the good things that the government is doing to try and support developers and to get more homes built. I mentioned the work we're doing with Future Cities Catapult to try and look at how we can use innovation to drive an increase in productivity in the sector. And I think one of the ways we'll do that is to look at sort of the life cycle, if you like, and try to identify the weak points, the points at which an intervention would have maximum impact. And what would be really great, I think, where the government could play a role is to sort of help broker that conversation across the property and innovation sectors, because my suspicion is you've got a load of fantastic innovators out there solving problems that people don't really think they've got, and a lot of property companies with problems they don't know how to articulate in a way that innovators can get hold of them and do something with them. So I think trying to broker that conversation and get some commonality around where are the quick wins and where are the big wins, and can we get the property companies on the one hand and the tech sector on the other hand aligned around tackling those problems, I think would be a great thing to do, actually, and where I think you could see significant breakthroughs quite quickly. Because this can be collaborative, I think. This doesn't need to be competitive, it can be collaborative.
So, sorry, it just strike me as that is really important. One of the reasons why I'm here, we're building up that capacity within the organisation. I think you see both at the political level and organisational level in and around not just government but in local authorities often as well these days, a real understanding that the world has shifted, that more administrative approach is not going to be the only thing that deals with it. I mean, the policy side is still really important. So the National Planning Policy Framework, that is a big part of what will shift the dial on this issue. But we know that actually getting this sort of sector rolling to be able to make those connections, as people have said, between the tech and the data entrepreneurs and the elements of the existing system, the existing sector, sorting out the public sector's services, digital services that work into this place.
James, are there any questions? Or?
No, actually there's not. So I was going to open it to the floor in a very traditional, old-school format, because you'll find what we've got with the technology that we've got is that the only microphones are currently on the stage. We like to do things really professionally. If anyone's got a question, if you want to shout it out as loud as you can so everyone can hear, and then perhaps, Susan, if you can replicate it, that'd be great. Susan, do you want to pick some hands? That'd be fantastic.
Okay, there's one down here.
Hi, I'm Reya, CEO of Unmortgage. So Paul, you asked what we need. There are two things that come to mind. You can push a button and see what a commercial building will rent for. So everybody in the stack can make a good decision. When it comes to rental residential property, all the data is held by the deposit collection agencies, which have a contract with your ministry that says they can't share that data. That would be hugely valuable for pretty much everybody in this room.
Clocked.
The second thing is, actually, I've got this awesome diagram on the conveyancing process that we have to go through. So we've got L&G's a shareholder in our business. We've got a partnership with Allianz to buy £500 million worth of property in the next 2 years. And the conveyancing process is this incredible mess. So, I mean, that's what it takes to buy a home. It takes a minimum, like you said, of 6 weeks. It's absurd. So for our business to really scale, we need to automate this.
Yeah.
Now we're going to do that. Help with government makes it so much easier.
So just, I'm not sure if everyone here, because it's probably quite a big room in for the voice to carry, but it's this question about conveyancing is a long and protracted process. And I think John Abbott's up next to kind of talk about some of the work that the Land Registry has been doing. But it really strikes me, if you look at all the stages in the conveyancing process, it's really a lot about, does this thing exist? Is this here? What do we really know? Is the road going to be extended over the top of the building? And actually all of those things are known somewhere within that organisation. And we've got to, from the public sector side, move from a mentality where someone's going to phone us up and then we're going to, rifle through a box file or something, and actually get this into a fit state. Now, actually, with 420 councils, including Scotland, many services that underpin that, this is quite a big undertaking, and we'll get there over time. But it's really important. I'm doing the discovery work at the moment. The input for that will, after the local government elections, we'll be blogging and interacting a lot more. So would really welcome feedback from yourself and others about what actually is there. We're trying to prioritise what are the data sets, what's the, how do we get this stuff machine readable in a really fit state, rather than sort of, sometimes available but not necessarily fit to be building products on top of.
And we also presumably have blockchain, coming along, which I imagine is going to affect the way we deal with house buying transactions. Do you? Okay, we won't start on that then.
I agree.
As Melanie said, let's see the things that can make the biggest impact and focus on them.
Okay, there's another question
And
over.
transparency.
There's a question over here.
Really quick thank you. It's great to hear you talking about the need to better use existing stock, because that's been absolutely the conversation for the last decade. But I wonder if part of the question we need to fix is what we mean when we say home. Everybody's got a number of homes we need, and we say we need X thousand homes. But I think we mystify home. At the moment, home is probably an investment. Some people, home is a version of people storage. To most individuals who consume what home is, it's a safe, affordable, secure platform to then go off and live their life. It's not the focus of their life, finding and taking a home. It's a platform to be who they are. And I think we've missed something there. We've so closely aligned home ownership as being the way forward. We need to find a way to separate home from ownership so people can have a sense of home, security, safety, affordability, and ownership in the society, the streets, the towns, the cities they live in, that aren't financially so closely welded to each other. Because until we can guarantee home for everybody, the sense of investment for some people who do very well out of it, and most people are now locked out of it, means we're not solving the problem for everybody, we're solving it for people increasingly well for those few people. And so we need to look at home ownership and what it really means for society as well.
Okay, I don't know if people at the back heard, but the question's about really what a home is, and the conflation of home as an investment and home as somewhere to live. And I think that's been a particular problem here because of house price inflation. Whereas if you look at Germany, for instance, where people are used to the idea of renting, they haven't had the same house price inflation, therefore haven't relied on their homes as the way of amassing capital. So
I think, Susan, I think it's a really good point. It's about ensuring that. So in the sector I work in the rental sector, we have, as a sector, been really bad at providing occupational security, providing somewhere that people think is aspirational to live in, providing a lifestyle and a community rather than just some walls and somewhere to lie down to get asleep. We're now offering 5-year leases to our residents that go up by inflation, so they get a certainty of of occupational security for 5 years. Their kids can go to school and they know they're not going to have to move house every year, and then because they can't afford the increase in rent. And again, looking at the law of unintended consequences of why do we have 1-year leases in this country in the rental market, and it's principally because bank lenders want the ability to get the house back from whoever's got the mortgage. It's not any long-term sensible decision about how we want our communities to be. Yeah. So the purpose-built for rent sector is looking at offering much longer leases, which allows it to be a lifestyle choice, occupational security, but greater flexibility about where you live, when you move. But it's coming up with new models, coming up with new business models around the way people live.
And I think we as a society, we certainly run the risk of the haves and the have-nots. So those who are on the property ladder and those who are not, and we create this huge envy and whatever. So, you know, phrase we often use is around the rising tide should be lifting all boats and not just bankers' yachts, to quote an old book, if you like. And all of those options have to be brought in, because we will end up with somebody like Donald Trump as Mayor of London in the next 5 or 10 years, unless we start bridging those gaps. I think that's where technology and the people in this room have a great opportunity, you know, help us on that residential side, you know, to become more creative, to become more efficient, and to deliver more homes.
Okay, well, I think that's a good place to stop. I think we're out of time. So thank you, panel. I think that was a really interesting discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.